Anytime Jesus begins a parable with "what do you think?" it ought to make us think, right? What do you think? A man had 2 sons, and he went to the first and said, "Son, go and work in the vineyard today." And he answered, "I will not." But afterward he changed his mind and went. And when he went to the other son and said the same, and he answered, "I go, sir," but did not go. Which of the 2 did the will of his father? They said, "The first." Jesus said to them, "Truly I say to you, the tax collectors and the prostitutes go into the kingdom of God before you. For John came to you in the way of righteousness, and you did not believe him. But the tax collectors and the prostitutes believed him. And even when you saw it, you did not afterward change your minds and believe him." I think that there are 2 meanings in this parable that we can attach to it. The first is an immediate meaning. Something that the people who heard it right then, they could make the application. It would have meant that to those people. And the second is a message to us 2,000 some odd years later, and how it has meaning still even today. But let's look at the immediate meaning first of all. The immediate meaning attaches meaning to each of the 2 sons. Naturally, we want to start with the first son. The first son in the parable, the one that said no, but then later went to work in the vineyard, they stand for the tax collectors and sinners, or prostitutes as this version calls it. These are people who all of their lives they refused God. All of their lives were about not doing what God wanted them to do. All of their lives were about doing what they wanted to do. They weren't going to be told what to do by some person or some being or whatever. They were going to do what they wanted to do. They were going to live their lives the way that they wanted to live their lives. You might say that these people lived their lives in open rebellion against God. But when Jesus came, they listened to him and they believed him. John the Baptist, same thing. They listened to John. They believed John. Excuse me. But they listened and believed. More than just listening and believing, though, they actually changed their lives to fit Jesus' teachings and John's teachings. John, of course, being the forerunner of Jesus. If they welcomed John, they would have welcomed Jesus as well. You know, we meet people like this all the time. We see them and we think, well, they'll never believe. There is no way that they would even listen to me if I tried to tell them about Jesus. And so we don't tell them about Jesus. We think, well, you know, they are just so steeped in sin. They are so set on their rebellion against God that there is no way that they would ever listen to anything that I have to say. See, the thing is, though, you never know until you ask, right? I mean, you can't make that determination for somebody else. You can make it for yourself, but not for them. And here's the thing, even if they say no, even if they say, you know what, I'm really not interested, you may not be able to reach them, but you know what? Somewhere, someone down the line, they might be able to reach them. And you might just be planting the seed right now. And later on, somebody's going to come along and water that seed. See, it's kind of like what Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians 3. With the Corinthians, he said, I planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but God made it grow. You see, your job may not be to lead that person to Jesus. Your job might be to plant the seed. And somebody else is going to water that seed and nurture it and develop it, and God's going to make it grow. But what happens if the farmer who is supposed to plant the seed doesn't plant the seed? How are the people later on down the road going to water it and nurture it and care for it? And how's God going to make it grow? You see, just because they don't respond to what you have to say to them and they don't want to talk about it or whatever, does not mean that they will never accept the gospel. We have to be very careful about writing off someone who says no the first time, because our job might just be to plant the seed, and somebody else is going to come along later and reap the harvest. But they can't reap the harvest if we don't plant the seed. That's the first son. Stands for the tax collectors and sinners. People that we think, well, they're so steeped in their evil ways, there's no way that they'd ever listen. And yet they might surprise us every once in a while. The second son, on the other hand, stands for the scribes and Pharisees. The religious professionals, the people who all of their lives they professed that they would serve and obey God only. That they were going to do God's will, that they were going to follow God's law. That was their job. That was what they were going to do. Yet, when Jesus came, the Son of God, or John, the forerunner of the Christ, when they came, they refused to even listen to them. And ultimately, they crucified Jesus. And more than that, they did what they wanted to John the Baptist as well. We need to understand, though, that this parable actually doesn't necessarily stand on its own or happen on its own. That it's actually part of an argument, disagreement, teaching opportunity that Jesus is having with the chief priests and the elders. And see, Jesus has just gotten the best of them, okay? They want to know by what authority Jesus is doing these things. This is verses 24 through 27, by the way. By what authority are you doing these things? And Jesus says, I'll tell you what, I'll ask you a question. You answer me, and then I'll answer you. And they, oh, yeah, no problem. We're smart people. We'll answer any question you have. What is your question? And he says, John the Baptist, his baptism, was it from heaven or from men? And they say, wait, we need to go into our chambers and consult about this for a few minutes. And they talk about it, and they think, we can't say it was from heaven, because then he's going to say, well, why didn't you believe him? We can't say it's from men, because all these people think that John was a prophet, and we'll get in trouble with them. So they come back to Jesus and they say, we don't know. He says, well, then I'm not going to tell you by whose authority I'm doing these things. He's got the better of them. Jesus is saying, all your lives, you've been making this great profession of faith and devotion to God. You've been saying that you follow God's law and the law of Moses, and you do it as best as you possibly can. And where the law was, quote unquote, questionable, you came up with your traditions that would be pleasing to God in your own mind anyway. But now, your attitude towards me cancels your whole profession. Yet the people that you brand as sinners, who have spent their lives in rebellion against God, they're welcoming me. They've changed and have found a place in the kingdom that you threw away. We meet people like the first son all the time. We meet people like the second son all the time as well. People who like to brag about themselves. They're great profession. Look how great I am. I go to church 3 times a week. I never miss a day of Bible reading. I always pray. And in my prayers, I always am careful to remind God how lucky he is that I let him on. How lucky I am that I'm on his team. That wasn't just a slip there, by the way. And we think, God, you're so lucky that I'm here and everything, and I'm such a good servant of yours. When somebody comes along, though, and points out a fault, they don't even entertain the notion that they could be wrong. Why? You're just jealous because I'm so good. Because I don't have any faults or what have you. Even if you point out that fault via the Bible, they say, well, that's your interpretation. Kind of like the Pharisee in the parable of the prayers of the Pharisee and the tax collector. Remember his prayer? God, aren't you glad that I'm so good? And Jesus says the other one who said, God, have mercy on me, the sinner. That's the one who went home justified. But in looking at these immediate meanings and how the sons stand for different types of people, isn't it amazing how the message that maybe the first people to hear this parable got is still so applicable even today? That's something that's so amazing to me about the Word of God, is that it was applicable then when it was written, and it's applicable even today. But what is the second meaning of this parable? And I'm about to sneeze. See? I told you. If I hadn't said anything, I would have done it. If I'd left my microphone on, I would have done it. Anyway, the second meaning has to do with words and deeds. Look at the two boys' words, what they say. See? This is embarrassing. The first boy, son, answers with almost contemptuous bluntness, doesn't he? The father says, I want you to go work in my vineyard. And he says, forget it. There's no way I'm going to do that. I don't want to work in the vineyard. And yet, he changes his mind, doesn't he? We don't know exactly why he changes his mind. We don't know what happened. Maybe he thought, you know what? This vineyard may one day be mine, so maybe I should take care of it. Make sure that it's being taken care of. But something changed his mind. The second son, on the other hand, answers with all politeness. I will, sir. I go, sir. He even uses sir. And that's something that dads like to hear from their kids, right? Yes, sir. No, sir. Yes, sir. I'm going to go right away and do that. Maybe or not. I don't know. But he answers with all politeness. That's their words. But as the cliche says, actions speak louder than words. Look at the two boys' deeds, at their actions, at what they do. The first canceled his refusal by going and working. Again, we don't know what happened. We don't know if the father gave him that look, the look that dad's the only one that can give you that. I don't know about you, but how many of you ever, when your dad asked you to do something, answered like this? Forget it. No way. I'm not going to do that. You probably didn't because you're here tonight, right? Yeah, that's my case too. I once told my dad no, I wouldn't do something, and I woke up the next morning and don't remember a thing. But anyway, the point being, of course, that, he was very disrespectful to his father, but then he respected his father by going and doing what he asked to do. The second, on the other hand, canceled his verbal courtesy by not following through. He said, sure, I'm going to go. And then maybe he saw his brother out in the field and thought, hey, I'm going to get credit for that because I told Dad I was going to go. And then he said, no, he wouldn't. And then he went out there. So maybe I'll get credit for what he's doing. Don't know what happened. But you look at the point. Deeds are very important. By our deeds, we can prove that we love someone. You can tell someone that you love them all day long. But if you're going behind their back every chance you get and stabbing them in the back, verbally assassinating their character, those words that you say, I love you, mean very little. But if you show that you love them, the words just mean that much more. Ever seen an irate mom out shopping maybe with her kids? And the kids are yelling and screaming, and you know that she's upset. You know that she's just at her wit's end. Yet as she deals with her kids, she's so patient and kind with them. Her deeds show how much she loves her kids. Or you think about knights in ancient days. They were trying to win the hand of the fair maiden or the princess. And what were they willing to do to show their love for that princess? They were willing to lay it on the line. I mean, compete in these weird games with horses and long swords and everything and all, and do unimaginable things. Because they wanted to show that they loved that person, that maiden. If you look over at James chapter 2, verses 14 through 26, I think that James is a very plagiaristic book of Jesus' teachings anyway. I think this is one instance where he's kind of sort of maybe thinking about this parable of Jesus. He says, "For what good is it, my brothers, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can that faith save him? If a brother or sister is poorly clothed and lacking in daily food, and one of you says to them, 'Go in peace, be warm and filled,' without giving them the things needed for the body, what good is that? So also faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead. But someone will say, 'You have faith and I have works. Show me your faith apart from your works, and I will show you my faith by my works. You believe that God is one, you do well. Even the demons believe and shudder. Do you want to be shown, you foolish person, that faith apart from works is useless? Was not Abraham our father justified by works when he offered up his son Isaac on the altar? You see that faith was completed. You see that faith was completed by his works. And the scripture was fulfilled that says, Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness. And he was called a friend of God. You see that a person is justified by works and not by faith alone. And in the same way, was not also Rahab the prostitute justified by works when she received the messengers and sent them out by another way? For as the body apart from the spirit is dead, so also faith apart from works is dead." Deeds aren't going to save anyone. That's not what I'm saying, and that's not what James is saying here. What James's point here is that deeds are important. If you're going to claim to have faith in God, then you better be obeying God. You can't say that you have faith in God and be acceptable to Him if that faith doesn't lead you to do what He wants you to do in the way that He wants you to do it. When someone does something nice for you, a lot of times you want to return the favor, don't you? You want to do something nice for them. And if you can't do something nice for them, that's where the whole pay it forward thing comes from. Then you do something nice for someone else who can't pay you back, and that's paying it forward. God showed us how much He loves us by an incredible, amazing gift of His grace. Shouldn't we want to show Him how much we love Him by the things that we do, by the way that we live our lives, by obeying Him in the way that He wants us to live our lives? The second meaning has to do with words and deeds. The second meaning of this parable has to do with saying and doing. Now again, we want to look at the two sons. The second son stands for those who say one thing but do another. These are people who maybe we might say they talk a good talk, but they fail to walk the good walk. Okay, they're all talk and no action. They're all, yes, we want to do the right things and say the right things and everything. They know the right things to say, but their actions disqualify what they say. This type of person does the greatest harm to the church. Because you see, you are a living, walking, breathing advertisement for the church. You're an advertisement for Jesus Christ. Henry Drummond, who preached on street corners for years, tells of a time when he was preaching to a group of young men who really had no use for the church or for God. They really wanted nothing to do with either one. A man walked by on the street, and one of the young men interrupted Mr. Drummond's sermon, talking by saying, "That man is the founder of our atheist club." And Mr. Drummond was taken aback by that. And he let him know. He was so surprised, and he let the young man know, "What? That man's a deacon in the church. How could he be the founder of your atheist club?" And back came the answer, "You're exactly right. If a man who lives a life like he does is one of the leaders in the church, we want nothing to do with the church or the God that it serves. You are an advertisement, not just for the Eastgate Church of Christ, but for God Himself. If people look at you and the way that you live your life, are they going to say, 'Hey, you know what? I want to be like that'? Or are they going to be more inclined to say, 'You know what? I don't want anything to do with that God that you serve'?" A wise person once said, "I cannot hear what you say for listening to who you are." The second son is the person whose profession is contradicted by his practice. The first son, on the other hand, stands for those who say one thing but do another. These maybe are ones who talk a bad talk, but they do walk the good walk. And this is the type of person that does the church the greatest credit. They say they don't want to do something. They say they really don't have time to do something. They say they really would rather somebody else do it. But when push comes to shove and the rubber meets the road, and insert whatever cliche you want to here, they're right in the thick of the activity, doing what needs to be done. And when they do, generally speaking, they'll downplay what they're doing. And they maybe are out trying to win souls for Jesus, trying to tell people about Jesus and His love for them and for everyone. And if you ask them about it, they'll say, "Oh, I'm not doing anything special. I'm not doing anything that anybody else shouldn't be doing, so it's not that big a deal." But even though they try to downplay it, their profession is proved by their practice. But when you stop and you look at this parable and you read through it, one thing that is clear, the real root of this parable is that neither son was satisfactory to the father. True, the first was a better man because he said no, but then changed his mind and went into the vineyard and worked. But neither son was perfect. It's better to say no and then go and obey than it is to say yes and then go and disobey. Okay? But it is best of all to say yes and then go and obey fully what was asked of you. Both sons hurt the heart of the father. The son who really brings joy to his father is the son who willingly hears and gladly obeys. So what type of child of God have you been? Have you been saying, "Yes, Lord, whatever you want me to do, I'll do it," and then not? Or have you been saying, "Well, I'm not going to do it this time. It's somebody else's turn to do it. It's somebody else needs to step up in it," but yet when it comes right down to it, you're right there in the thick of things, doing what was asked of you? Or have you... there was a time when that happened to me, actually. I was living in a small town, or we were living in a small town, and decided I need to get to know some people, so I went to a meeting of the Chamber of Commerce. At the end of that meeting, I didn't know this when I went, they were electing officers. And before I knew what happened, I was vice president of the Chamber of Commerce. I don't know how that happened, and funny thing is, For the 2 years that I served, I never paid dues or anything. Yet I was vice president of the chamber because nobody else wanted to do the job. And I was silly enough to be there and think, well, I guess I can, yeah. And they said, you're elected. Funny how that works. Or have you been the kind of child of God that God really wants you to be? By saying, yes, Father, I'm going to do whatever you ask me to do, whenever you ask me to do it, whatever your desire is, and then going about doing the task to the very best of your ability. You see, that's the type of child that God wants. That's the child of God that we should strive to be. Is that the type of child of God that you've been trying to be in living your life? If not, something needs to change. And the funny thing, well, not the funny thing is, the sad thing is that no matter how long you wait, God is not going to change. God's desires for you are not going to change. You have to change. If you need to make a change this evening and we can help you in some way through a public response, then don't leave here still needing to make that change. Make that change now. And again, if we can help you through a public response, won't you come to the front now as we stand and sing together?